I carried my coffee cup into the kitchen the next morning and stopped so suddenly that hot coffee spilled across my hand. The family photo wall beside the refrigerator looked different. For 30 years, every photograph had stayed in the same careful arrangement Noel and I created together. Wade in his Little League uniform. Our trip to Yellowstone in 1998. Christmas mornings with matching pajamas and tired smiles. But now several frames were missing. I set my cup down slowly and stepped closer. The photos that included me were gone. Not all of them. Just enough to leave obvious empty spaces on the wall. Noel holding our newborn son remained. Wade and Romy at their wedding remained. But the family portrait from our 40th anniversary party had disappeared completely. So had the framed picture of me teaching my granddaughter Emma how to bake pies in this very kitchen. My chest tightened. It was not the missing photographs that hurt most. It was the precision of it. Someone had stood here carefully choosing which memories deserved to stay and which ones needed to vanish. I heard footsteps behind me. Romy entered wearing cream-colored yoga clothes and carrying her phone. She froze briefly when she saw me standing at the wall, but the expression disappeared almost instantly. "Oh good, you are awake," she said casually, opening the refrigerator. "The realtor is coming by this afternoon, so try to keep things tidy." Realtor. The word landed heavily in the quiet kitchen. I turned toward her slowly. Realtor. Romy grabbed almond milk and poured it into a glass without looking at me. "Well, yes. We need to start preparing the house for listing." I stared at her. "You already hired someone to sell this house?" She shrugged lightly. "Wade and I have been discussing it for months." Months. While Noel was still alive. While I was cooking Sunday dinners and folding towels upstairs and sitting beside my husband during chemotherapy appointments, my son and his wife had apparently already been planning what to do with my home after his death. My stomach twisted painfully. "You discussed selling my home before Noel even passed away?" Romy finally looked at me then, her expression flat and impatient. "Myrtle, you need to stop calling it your home. Legally, it belongs to Wade now." The cruelty in her voice was calm, practiced, like she had repeated those words privately many times before saying them aloud to me. I heard Wade entering the kitchen before I saw him. His tie hung loose around his neck, his phone pressed against his ear. He ended the call when he noticed the tension between us. "What is going on?" Romy answered before I could speak. "Your mother is upset about the realtor." Wade rubbed his forehead tiredly. "Mom, we already talked about this." "No," I said quietly. "You talked at me while I sat there in shock." He sighed heavily, as though my grief had become an inconvenience interrupting his morning routine. "Look, we are trying to move forward here. Emma needs stability. Romy and I need more room. It makes financial sense." Financial sense. I looked around the kitchen. Noel had renovated himself after retirement. The oak cabinets he spent months staining by hand. The small scratch near the stove where Wade dropped a baseball bat at age 12. The breakfast table where we celebrated every birthday, every graduation, every Christmas morning. To them, it was square footage and market value. To me, it was my life. Wade walked toward the coffee machine. "Also," he added casually, "we are converting the upstairs guest room into Emma's playroom next week, so you should probably finish packing anything you want to keep." I blinked at him. The guest room. My room. The room I had moved into after Noel died, because sleeping in our bedroom alone became unbearable. They were not even pretending anymore. My belongings had already become temporary clutter in their minds. I looked at my son carefully then, searching for traces of the gentle little boy who once cried when he accidentally stepped on a butterfly in our garden. I could not find him. "I did not raise you to treat people this way," I whispered. Wade's jaw tightened instantly. "And I did not ask to inherit a giant expensive house while trying to support a family, Mom." "Support a family?" I repeated softly. "You make more money in a month than Noel and I made in a year when we bought this house." Romy crossed her arms. "That is exactly why this conversation is pointless. You do not understand how expensive modern life is." I almost laughed at the absurdity of hearing financial lectures from a woman carrying a handbag worth more than my monthly grocery budget. But exhaustion settled over me instead. Deep exhaustion, the kind that reaches your bones. Wade picked up his car keys. "We are late. Can we not do this today?" Then he paused near the doorway and looked back at me with something close to irritation. "And Mom, please do not tell people family business. It makes everyone uncomfortable. Family business. As though my humiliation needed to stay hidden to protect their image." The front door closed behind them moments later, leaving the house painfully silent again. I stood alone in the kitchen staring at the empty spaces on the photo wall. That was when I noticed something else. Noelle's old locked file cabinet near the dining room had been moved slightly crooked against the wall. My pulse slowed. Noelle never left things crooked. Never. I sat at the dining table for nearly an hour with Noelle's letter resting unopened in my lap. Outside, I could hear distant lawn mowers humming through the neighborhood and children laughing somewhere down the street. Ordinary sounds. Normal life continuing while mine quietly unraveled inside these walls. Eventually, I unfolded the letter carefully, smoothing the creases with trembling fingers. Myrtle, if you are reading this, then I am no longer there to protect you myself. The words blurred instantly through fresh tears. Noelle's handwriting looked steady and calm, exactly like the man himself. I swallowed hard and continued reading. Over the past year, I noticed changes in Wade and Romy that troubled me deeply. Conversations stopped when I entered rooms. Questions about bank accounts became more frequent. Romy asked several times whose name the house belonged to, though she pretended it was casual curiosity. I wanted to believe I was imagining things. But a husband learns to trust his instincts after 32 years of marriage. My chest ached so sharply I pressed my hand against it. Noelle knew. All this time, while I sat beside his hospital bed holding his hand and praying for one more year together, he had already been quietly preparing for the possibility that I would stand alone against our own family. I continued reading slowly. 2 months before my surgery, Wade asked if I would consider transferring ownership of the house to him early for tax purposes. When I refused, he became angry in a way I had never seen before. The next morning, Romy arrived with printed financial articles about inheritance planning. They thought I did not notice what they were really asking for. But I noticed. I noticed everything. My throat tightened painfully. Memories flooded back now with cruel clarity. Wade suddenly insisting Noelle should avoid stressful paperwork during treatments. Romy volunteering to organize filing cabinets. The whispered arguments behind closed doors after they thought I had gone to bed. Noelle had seen through all of it while I desperately clung to the belief that grief and illness were simply making everyone emotional. At the bottom of the letter, Noelle's handwriting became shakier. The house belongs to you completely, Myrtle. I changed the deed 6 months ago and placed everything into survivorship ownership under your protection. Wade does not know. Neither does Romy. I prayed I would recover and none of this would matter. But if I did not, then I needed you safe. Safe. The word shattered something inside me. Not because Noelle left me a house. Because even while dying, he spent his remaining strength trying to shield me from betrayal. Tears slid silently down my face onto the paper. I looked around the dining room through blurred vision. The mahogany table. The faded curtains Noelle always refused to replace because he liked how the morning light looked through them. Every corner of this house still carried his fingerprints, his patience, his love. And Wade wanted to reduce all of it into market value and square footage. I carefully placed the documents back inside the envelope just as I heard tires rolling into the driveway outside. My pulse steadied instantly. Through the front window, I saw Romy stepping out of her SUV wearing sunglasses and carrying shopping bags. Behind her walked a tall man in a gray blazer holding a leather folder beneath his arm. The realtor. I wiped my tears slowly and folded Noelle's letter with deliberate care. Then I stood up straighter than I had in days. For the first time since Noelle died, the helpless fog around my mind began to lift. They thought I was grieving too deeply to notice what they were doing. They thought age made me weak. But standing there with Noelle's letter pressed against my chest, I realized something important. I was not the one about to lose my home. I opened the front door before Romy could reach for her key. The realtor stood beside her with a professional smile already prepared, but I noticed how quickly his expression shifted when he saw the tension in my face. Romy recovered first. Perfect timing, she said brightly, stepping inside without waiting for permission. This is Daniel Mercer. He is going to walk through the property and help us discuss listing options. Property, not home. Never home. The tall man extended his hand politely. Mrs. Holloway, I am very sorry for your loss. Thank you, I replied quietly, shaking his hand. His grip softened slightly, as though he sensed something uncomfortable moving beneath the surface of this meeting. Romy was already moving through the foyer in fast, determined steps. The kitchen was remodeled 6 years ago, she explained to him while gesturing around the house. And the upstairs has excellent potential for a children's entertainment space. I watched her carefully. The confidence in her voice almost impressed me. She spoke like someone giving a tour of a property she already owned. Wade arrived 10 minutes later, still wearing his office clothes, carrying his laptop bag over one shoulder. "Sorry I am late," he muttered before kissing Romy quickly on the cheek. Then he glanced at me. "Mom." Just that. One word. Flat and distracted. Daniel opened his leather folder and spread papers across the dining table. Based on comparable homes in the neighborhood, this property could list between $850,000 and $900,000 depending on updates. Wade nodded immediately. "That is around what we expected." Expected. They had already discussed numbers privately. Already imagined their future built from selling the home Noel and I spent 32 years paying for. I remained standing quietly near the window while they talked about renovations, market timing, and possible buyers. Romy suggested removing outdated furniture before photographs were taken. Outdated furniture. She meant Noel's leather reading chair beside the fireplace. The one where he used to fall asleep every Sunday afternoon with a history book resting on his chest. My silence seemed to encourage them. Wade walked upstairs with Daniel to discuss floor plans, while Romy lingered in the kitchen, scrolling through her phone. "You could make this easier on everyone," she said casually without looking up. I folded my hands calmly. "How exactly?" "By accepting reality." She finally lifted her eyes toward me. "You cannot maintain this place forever. Wade and I are trying to build something for Emma. We deserve that chance." Deserve. The words settled coldly between us. I studied her face for a long moment. Young, beautiful, perfectly composed. But underneath her polished appearance, I could now see something restless and hungry that I had ignored for years. "Did you love Noel?" I asked softly. Her eyebrows lifted slightly in surprise. "Of course. Then how could you walk through this house 1 week after his funeral talking about removing his belongings?" For the first time, her expression cracked. Just briefly. Irritation flashed across her face before the mask returned. "Because someone has to think practically." Practical. Such a clean word for something so cruel. Upstairs, I heard Wade laughing lightly with the realtor. Laughing. Less than 2 weeks after burying his father. Something inside me finally settled then. Not rage. Not grief. Clarity. Clear and sharp as winter air. Wade came back downstairs carrying old property sketches Daniel had found near Noel's office. "This place really does have incredible resale value," he said. Then he looked toward me almost as an afterthought. "Mom, Daniel thinks we should move quickly before interest rates shift again." I smiled gently for the first time in days. A small calm smile that immediately made Wade pause. "That sounds complicated," I said softly. "Especially for a house that does not belong to either of you." The entire room went silent. Wade stared at me as though he had misheard the words completely. Daniel Mercer slowly lowered the papers in his hands while Romy gave a short, uncomfortable laugh. "What are you talking about?" she asked quickly. I walked toward the dining table with calm, deliberate steps and placed the county ownership documents beside the realtor's folder. The paper made a soft sound against the polished wood surface. Such a small sound for something capable of changing the entire atmosphere inside the room. Wade frowned and picked up the documents first. I watched the exact moment confusion shifted into disbelief across his face. "This is not possible," he whispered. Romy moved beside him immediately, scanning the page with widening eyes. "Noel transferred the deed into survivorship ownership 6 months ago," I said quietly. "Legally, this house belongs to me." Silence settled heavily over the dining room. Daniel cleared his throat awkwardly and adjusted his glasses. "Mr. Holloway," he said carefully, "if these documents are valid, then your mother is correct. The property cannot be listed or sold without her authorization." Wade looked pale now, truly pale, like someone watching years of assumptions collapse in real time. "Dad would have told me," he muttered weakly. I almost answered immediately. But then I remembered Noel sitting quietly in his recliner during those final weeks, watching our son with tired, disappointed eyes whenever money conversations appeared. Maybe Noel wanted to tell him. Maybe he simply realized there was no point anymore. Romy crossed her arms tightly. "This does not make sense. Wade is his only son. And I was his wife," I replied softly. "For 32 years. She opened her mouth again, but no words came out this time. Daniel gathered his folders carefully, clearly desperate to escape the growing tension. "Perhaps this is a family matter that should be resolved privately," he suggested politely. "I can return another time if needed." "There will not be another time," I said gently. "The house is not for sale." Wade looked at me then with something dangerously close to anger beneath his shock. "So what now?" he asked sharply. "You just expect us to live here under your rules?" "Under your rules?" I nearly smiled at the irony. For 2 weeks, they had treated me like an unwanted guest in my own home. Now suddenly the idea of someone else controlling the rules felt offensive to him. "No," I answered calmly. "I expect respect." The word hung quietly between us. Simple, reasonable, yet somehow impossible for them to offer. Romy grabbed her purse from the kitchen counter with jerky, irritated movements. "This is unbelievable," she snapped. "After everything Wade has done for this family." I looked at her steadily. "Your husband helped carry groceries inside sometimes. Noel paid for his college tuition. Noel gave him the down payment for your first condo. Noel helped cover your medical bills after Emma was born. Do not confuse generosity you received with sacrifices you made." Her face flushed instantly. Wade stepped forward. "Mom, stop." But I did not stop. Years of silence sat too heavily inside my chest now. "You both walked through this house measuring furniture while your father's slippers were still beside the bed." My voice remained quiet, but even I could hear the coldness settling into it now. "You planned my removal before I finished grieving." Wade looked away first, not out of shame, out of discomfort, as though being confronted with truth irritated him more than his own behavior. Daniel quietly excused himself moments later, nearly rushing toward the front door. The second it closed behind him, the house felt different. Smaller somehow, tighter. Romy folded her arms again. "Fine," she said coldly. "If that is how you want this to be." I looked around the room slowly. Noel's reading chair beside the fireplace. The family photographs they had not removed yet. The afternoon sunlight warming the hardwood floors he spent months refinishing by hand after retirement. Then I looked directly at my son. "No," I said softly. "This is simply how you made it." The next morning, the house felt unnaturally quiet. No slammed cabinet doors from Romy. No impatient footsteps from Wade rushing through the hallway with his phone pressed against his ear. I stood at the kitchen sink watching rain slide slowly down the windows while the coffee maker hissed softly behind me. For the first time since Noel's funeral, I slept through the night without waking from panic. Not because the pain was gone, because uncertainty was gone. Grief is heavy enough on its own. Betrayal makes it unbearable. But truth has a strange way of clearing the air inside a house. Around 10 o'clock, Emma wandered into the kitchen rubbing sleep from her eyes. At 8 years old, she still wore oversized pajama shirts and carried stuffed animals tucked beneath one arm. She stopped when she saw me standing there. "Daddy and Mommy are fighting upstairs," she whispered quietly. I turned from the sink immediately. "About what, sweetheart?" Emma shrugged sadly. "About this house." The way she said house made my chest ache. Children always know more than adults think they do. She climbed onto one of the kitchen stools while I poured pancake batter onto the griddle. Noelle used to make pancakes every Saturday morning shaped like little animals when Wade was her age. I almost smiled remembering how terrible they looked. Emma watched silently for a moment before speaking again. "Mommy said we might have to move." There was no accusation in her voice, just confusion. I placed a warm pancake onto her plate carefully. Sometimes grown-ups make plans before understanding the whole situation. She looked down at her fork. "Are you leaving?" Such a small question. Yet hearing it nearly broke me more than anything Romy ever said. I sat beside her slowly. "No, sweetheart. I am staying right here." Relief softened her little face instantly. "Good," she whispered. "Grandpa liked this house. Grandpa liked this house. Not because it was expensive, not because it had resale value, because it held birthdays and Christmas mornings and fingerprints on freshly painted walls. Because family lived here once before greed entered quietly through the front door wearing polished shoes and polite smiles." Upstairs, I heard another sharp burst of arguing followed by a slammed door. Emma flinched slightly. I reached over and squeezed her hand gently. "Eat your breakfast." A few minutes later, Wade entered the kitchen looking exhausted. Dark circles sat beneath his eyes, and his tie hung loose around his neck, even though it was barely morning. He stopped when he saw Emma beside me eating pancakes. For a brief second, something softened in his expression. Then the tension returned immediately. "Emma," he said quietly, Go finish getting dressed for school. She obeyed without argument, carrying her plate toward the hallway. Before disappearing upstairs, she turned back toward me. Thank you for breakfast, Grandma. The words lingered warmly in the kitchen after she left. Wade poured himself coffee without speaking. I noticed his hands shaking slightly around the mug. Romy is upset, he finally muttered. I kept my voice calm. Romy has been upset since learning she cannot take something that was never hers. His jaw tightened. You are making this harder than it needs to be. I looked at him carefully then. Truly looked at him. At the tired eyes, the defensive posture, the frustration barely covering panic underneath. And suddenly, for the first time in weeks, I saw not a villain standing in my kitchen, but a weak man who allowed someone else's greed to hollow him out slowly from the inside. No, Wade, I said softly. Life already made this hard. Your father died. He looked away immediately. That one sentence hit him harder than any argument could have. Silence settled heavily between us again. Then quietly, almost too quietly to hear, he asked, Did Dad really think I would hurt you? I stared out the rain-covered kitchen window for a long moment before answering. I think your father hoped he was wrong. That afternoon, the rain finally stopped and weak sunlight filtered through the living room windows. I sat quietly in Noel's leather chair with one of his old photo albums resting open across my lap. The pages smelled faintly of dust and cedar wood. Every photograph inside carried pieces of a life that suddenly felt very far away. Wade at 6 years old holding a fishing pole bigger than his arms. Noel teaching him how to ride a bicycle in the driveway while I stood nearby laughing behind my camera. There had been so much love in this house once. Real love. The kind built slowly through ordinary days and sacrifices nobody notices at the time. Around 3 o'clock, I heard the front door open sharply. Romy entered first, still wearing her office clothes and carrying expensive shopping bags that swung angrily against her leg. She stopped when she saw me sitting calmly in the living room. We need to talk, she announced immediately. Not hello. Not how are you holding up after losing your husband. Just business. I closed the photo album carefully before answering. Then sit down. She remained standing. Wade told me about your conversation this morning. I folded my hands quietly in my lap. I assumed he would. Her eyes narrowed slightly. You are manipulating him with guilt. The accusation almost made me smile. For years I blamed myself for every uncomfortable family gathering, every canceled holiday, every growing distance between my son and me. Women like Romy survive by convincing others that basic human decency is emotional manipulation. Your husband lost his father 11 days ago, I said softly. If guilt exists in this house, I did not create it. Her jaw tightened instantly. You think you are some innocent victim here? I looked at her calmly. No, I think I am a widow. That seemed to unsettle her more than anger would have. She paced toward the fireplace, glancing around the room with restless irritation. Do you know what Wade told me last night? She asked suddenly. I remained silent. He said maybe we pushed too hard. She laughed bitterly under her breath. After everything we planned. There it was again. Not grief. Not family healing. Plans. Strategies. Expectations built around a house that was never theirs. I studied her face carefully. Beneath the polished makeup and expensive clothes, exhaustion was finally beginning to show. You love the idea of this house, I said quietly. Not the people inside it. Her eyes flashed immediately. That is not fair. Is it not? My voice stayed soft. Noel spent his final months believing his son cared more about property than family. I spent my first week as a widow being told to pack my bags. Which part feels unfair to you? For a moment, she looked almost shaken. Then pride hardened her expression again. Wade deserves security, she snapped. We both do. The economy is terrible. Housing prices are impossible. We were trying to build a future for Emma. By taking away mine, silence filled the room after that. Heavy, uncomfortable, honest. Romy looked away first, her eyes drifting toward the family photographs still hanging along the hallway wall. Some remained crooked from where they removed frames earlier that week. You think I am a terrible person, she muttered quietly. I considered the question carefully before answering. No, I think you became comfortable confusing ambition with entitlement. Something flickered across her face then. Not shame exactly, but recognition. Like someone hearing a truth they already suspected deep down. Upstairs, I heard Wade moving around inside the bedroom he once shared with toy trains and baseball trophies long before adulthood complicated him. Long before resentment and money poisoned simple things. Romy picked up her purse again slowly. "What happens now?" she asked without looking at me. I glanced down at the old photo album resting beside me. Noelle smiling beside the lake during our anniversary trip 10 years ago. Wade standing between us with one arm around each parent. We looked like a family in those pictures. Maybe once we truly were. That depends, I answered quietly, on whether your husband remembers who he used to be.